This video will provide an overview first of how an elementary teacher might use the gradebook in Schoology to implement equitable grading and instruction aligned practices. And then after looking at how a teacher might use it, we'll go into some of the features, some of the key settings that we would need to use in order to set it up in this way. So here we're looking at the mastery screen in Schoology, which does connect directly to the EGP Elementary Grade Passback app. So we're looking at, we can see we've got our students, and we're focused here on just math-related domains. So you can see this is a third grade math class. We've got the 5 math content related domains at the top, operations and algebraic thinking, and you see some other examples here. So I'm going to click on the operations and algebraic thinking to open up our scores in that area. So now we're seeing the overall operations and algebraic thinking domain, as well as the 4 learning targets that are feeding into operations and algebraic thinking. So quickly I'm going to move over and show what these 4 learning targets are. You can see the first one is I can represent and solve problems involving multiplication and division. And there are 3 other learning targets, all related to operations and algebraic thinking. And each of those have been entered into this gradebook. And I want to be clear that what's been entered in the gradebook here and what we're seeing in these 4 columns, these are not actual assignments or assessments related to those learning targets. These are the mastery scores for those learning targets. So teachers, elementary teachers, they might give a number of assessments related to OA1, and we can go back here, that's I can represent and solve problems involving multiplication and division. So they've given a number of assessments. They might have recorded those assessment scores in a paper roll book. They might have entered them in Schoology. They just haven't tagged them or aligned them to a learning target, so they're not showing up in the gradebook here. But they have entered mastery scores. So in looking at the range of assessment scores for OA1, it looks like this student was currently at a 3 level understanding of OA1. And then there were a range of assessment scores for OA2, and the teacher determined the student was also at a level 3 in that learning target, but the student is only at a 2 level understanding and a 2 level understanding in these last 2 learning targets. So because these are all showing up as aligned to the same report card domain, operations and algebraic thinking, they've all been aligned to operations and algebraic thinking, those 4 scores are getting averaged together to determine this student's overall score in operations and algebraic thinking. Again, that averaging would not be as problematic here because these are final levels of proficiency in each of these 4 learning targets. So then those are averaged together to determine an overall score. We're not averaging over time within the same learning target, which would be problematic. So that was an example of operations and algebraic thinking. We also have measurement and data, and if I click on that, I can see I've also got 4 learning targets related to measurement and data. If I go back over here, I can see these are the 4 learning targets related to measurement and data. So again, this teacher has created 4 mastery columns for those 4 different learning targets. These would not be 4 different assessments. For MD1, there may have been multiple assessments, and overall the student was at a 3 level understanding. There may have been multiple assessments for MD2, and overall the student was at a 4. And then for each of these final mastery scores, the gradebook is going to take those scores together and average them for a final score of 3.75 in measurement and data. And then this is the score that will transfer over to the EGP, which is connected to MISIS. So now we're going to do a quick overview of the things that are important to do with your gradebook in order to make it function in this way. So one of the key pieces that needs to be done in our grade setup, while we do have the default elementary scale, this sometimes incorrectly communicates a connection between percentages and those 4, 3, 2, 1 scores. So rather than use that scale that can sometimes be confusing, we might create this proficiency-based scale, which is much clearer, a points-based scale, and we just use the descriptors that we have on the elementary progress report. So a 4 would indicate that the student has exceeded expectations on that grade level standard or learning target. So we create that proficiency-based scale. Another thing that we need to do when creating materials in an elementary gradebook that works this way, so if I go into my operations and algebraic thinking folder that I've created, if I were to open up one of these materials, again, this would be my mastery column for OA1, that first learning target in operations and algebraic thinking. And if I were to open it up, an important thing that I've done is I have aligned it to operations and algebraic thinking. And so teachers would do that by just going here, align, custom learning objectives, school, LAUSD report card domains, and then you choose the content area. This would be a math content K through 6. This is a third grade one, and then I've just clicked operations and algebraic thinking. So that's really important to have that alignment there. Only materials that are aligned to learning objectives will show up in the mastery screen, and only materials that are aligned to the report card domains, such as this, operations and algebraic thinking, will feed into the EGP. I can enter other materials in the gradebook, and if I don't want them to show up in the EGP or mastery screen, I just make sure I don't align them to a learning objective or align them to one of the report card domains. And then a final important thing for this setup that we just reviewed, if I go back to my mastery screen, if you go into the mastery settings, there are a few different options for how overall learning objective grades can be determined. We actually have highest score and decaying average, which in other situations might be very useful. But again, because we're only entering those mastery scores for the various learning targets within a domain, I've left it as average because we do want those mastery scores on those learning targets. We want those to be averaged together to determine the overall domain grade. For that situation, highest score or decaying average would not make sense.